Um, it's an incredible work and also takes us back in time to an era where reason and how do I say, rational thinking was really paramount. And you'll see that he takes us step by step through an idea, even if something is, like, you may say, sometimes he seems repetitive. Sometimes he seems like, oh, that point is very, very simple. But he'll never skip a point. He'll always go through each different proof and each different, rationale, each different explanation to bring to his conclusion. He doesn't. Okay. So the author is Rabbi Bachya ibn Pakuda, and maybe I'll do some more research more into his background. But he was, he was a Sephardic Jew living in the Middle Ages. I believe he lived after the time of Maimonides, or he may have been, but during a similar period in which, again, the beliefs of Aristotle and Aristotelian philosophy were very dominant in the Arab world. I know it sounds crazy to talk about this today because they don't seem like they're very philosophical nowadays. So it's a little hard to comprehend this, but particularly from Spain. Spain was a Muslim country, right before the Christian conquest. So he may have lived in Spain. I wonder if I can get any. Yeah, if we look at, I'll read some of the foreword. It gives us a little background. So the foreword, he begins, Rabbeinu Bachya ibn Pakuda's Duties of the Heart is a powerful work that can help you attain a more uplifted state of mind than the one you were in before the reading. So it can uplift you and, kind of bring you on a different plane. So it can inspire you, basically, is what he's saying. It is a book about inwardness and about one's conception of God. It is about reflection and gratitude, trust and sincerity, discipline and love. It is a book about the inner life. So I thought that's a great book for Noahide's 2.0 or 3.0. Because, I mean, in reality, and it's not just the Noahide community, but it's really, as Rabbi Nachman says, but really is obviously very a fundamental belief in Hasidic thinking, and I think really in Jewish thinking in general, is that our sincerity and our feeling towards the commandments and towards God is really fundamental and really the basis and maybe almost an objective. It's really what Hashem wants, right? And I actually was wanted to quote to bring out this point from Deuteronomy 28, verse 47, which is very famous and it's being spoke of right now a lot. I've heard this speak about in regards to current events, just about something that we need to improve on in terms of, what to learn from or what. So anyway, you're talking about in the midst of the rebuke there. Deuteronomy is talking about the curses and the I guess I could say the tragedies, the different forms in which the children of Israel and the Jewish people will be afflicted over the exile if they don't hearken and they don't follow Hashem and his commandments. So in verse 47, in the middle of it, I mean, really, if you read these verses, they're very, very powerful. So let's actually begin 2 verses earlier just to get the flow, and also again it's very profound and but also very what's the word I'm looking for? But it's like cold water on your face. I mean, it definitely shakes you up to hear these words, extremely serious and not to be taken lightly. So I'm looking in the Hebrew, but I'll try to translate as best I can. It will come upon you all these curses, and they will pursue you, and they will overcome you. Meaning to say that they will reach you until they destroy you, because you did not hearken to the voice of God, the voice of the Lord your God, to guard and to watch over his commandments, keep his commandments and his statutes as he commanded you. And they will be upon you as a sign and as a wonder, a symbol upon you and your offspring forever. And then it says, this is on account, or there's 2 ways it can be read, and this is in place of the fact that you did not serve the Lord your God with joy and with a gladness of heart and from an abundance of everything. So that's really the verse I wanted to focus on. And there's a reading that's very well known that you don't read it that it's in exchange for, but you read it because of or on account of. So the different forms of how to read the first word. In Hebrew, the word is tachat, or in Ashkenazic Hebrew, tachas. But I think the more general translation is, and I'm looking in the Targum. Yeah, the Targum explains it that in exchange, that that means in replacing the fact that you didn't serve God with joy, you'll have this. In other words, and instead of being a situation where you had everything and you didn't serve God with joy, you'll have reason not to be joyous. But there's another reading. The other reading is actually, it's kind of a little bit simpler, actually. The other reading is that due to the fact, or on account of, that you didn't serve the Lord your God with joy and with a gladness of heart, with an abundance of everything. So in other words, that the fact that you could have served God, but you didn't do it with happiness, that was enough. That was already enough of a problem that could bring you to all these other terrible tragedies that have befallen. So, another way of saying it, I mean, there's many ways of saying it, and he's going to get to some of this, but the point is that God wants a relationship with us, and just simply by rote going through things and not connecting and not feeling a love for God is a deep deficiency in our service of Him and our fulfilling of the commands that He wants of us. So, although this is directed to the Jewish people, but I think it's an idea that we can take everyone that applies to all. I mean, we certainly see that this is something God very much wants. You can argue this is a higher level, maybe just for the Jewish people. It is possible. But we certainly see that it's a wonderful form of service that a person should obtain a love of God. And the reason I'm connecting love with serving God with joy is because they go together. When you love someone, in a very deep sense, then you're happy to do, for them. You're happy to be involved with them. And you're glad to be in their company. I saw a wonderful thing, actually. I was just reviewing some of Tanya today. And for some reason, this particularly stuck in my mind, maybe because I was giving this class and God wanted to send me a message of what to teach about. But, he makes this reference that the commandments are like an embrace. That when a person fulfills the commandments, he's embracing God. That God manifests himself through the commandments and therefore and we unify with God through them. It's a form of an embrace. Isn't that a wonderful way to look at performing a commandment, that we're embracing God, he embraces us when we perform one. So, and that's one of, I think, the points here is that, is there a feeling in what we're doing? Is there sincerity in what we're doing? And, if we look into this idea a little deeper, as on account they didn't serve God with joy. So I think if we take it deeper, we can understand that it's not just, the truth is, not serving God with joy is not the worst sin. There are a lot worse sins. However, it's the gateway to all sins, because a person needs to have happiness in life. So if a person is not happy serving God, they'll seek other things. And that's when the floodgates, and that's when the problems really begin. But it all starts from the fact that your heart's not in it. It's a secondary pursuit. It's not something that a person's passionate about. And not just that, the point is, and not that this is a personal ambition, that a person, has a checklist of commandments they want to commit for themselves, and it's self-serving, but it's being connected to the Almighty and doing his will and really appreciating him to the extent that there's a love there, that there's a deep gratitude there, that there's an appreciation of his protection of us, that and there's a fear also, understanding that he's the well, how would I say, he is the absolute truth, and we can't fool him. And the truth about, he's the absolute moral truth. And so it's something people really don't understand. It's something very hard, I think, to take, because we live in such a world that just doesn't care, unfortunately. But God knows that too. But the point is that what I mean to say is that, from God's perspective, for example, if a person has to, weigh between doing something unethical or losing $1 million, to a human being, that's a very difficult test, right? Particularly losing it. Making it, okay, some people, but if you have it, you're living that way already, you have the lifestyle, and there's just a little white area, gray area there, but in the absolutes, what's the excuse? Why? Because you need, what difference does any of that make? From God's perspective, from a perspective of truth, it doesn't, on the other hand, God understands our limitations. He understands what we're going through. And obviously, I would think that he takes all that into consideration. I'm just trying to give you an example of the fear of the idea of what our fear of God should be based on. What's, what is he, an angry God? He's not being an angry God, but he's a truthful God, and we're not truthful. In other words, he's a God that's zealous about morality. He's zealous about being good and upright to the absolute extent where that's everything. That's what he stands for. He doesn't care about, he understands people's needs. I don't want to go to that extreme, but in an absolute world, you could say, well, what are you, think about the angels. The angel said to God, right? He said, why are you giving man the Torah? Doesn't that belong in heaven? When are you giving it to him with his flesh and blood, with his mundane things and everything? So obviously the angels are a reflection of God's reality. They're not like, even though they have they're separate entities, but they live within the God, more godly reality, right? So they more understand better in a certain sense, although they're also wrong. Anyway, I'm doing what Sandy told me not to do, which is getting off track a little bit. But my point is simply that, God is both, gives us everything, provides for us, is our shepherd, is our parent, watches over us, but he also, is the column, of in the fire of truth, so to speak. And when we do something wrong, that reality, will show itself. For example, in other words, when the body falls away and there's just a pristine soul is left, right? Then, I mean, vis-a-vis the soul, does any of these things really matter? Any of our little concerns and, why we didn't do this, why we didn't help this person, or why we didn't do that good deed that was available and we just didn't do it. What are we going to say? What are we going to say? There was another deal I had to make then? And this, what is it going to matter? Anyway, something to think about. Back to the topic. So anyway, let me get back to the forward, but I just wanted to bring out, because he gets right into it, is that he's going to talk all about the inner life, love of God, fear of God, a relationship with God. And but my point is also that's also fundamental to practice, because I don't think a person can really practice properly, particularly nowadays, without having it. There's too many tests, there's too many obstacles, there's too many enticements. The person is not impassioned about his faith and his practice. How are you going to stick with it without, otherwise it happens. It's like Elijah said to the people. He says, until when are you standing on two paths? If it's the Baal, follow him. If it's God, follow him. What's it do? But that can happen to people, because when they're enticed, and people can fall, and then they come back, and then they fall. But this is not a way. If a person is impassioned and is connected to God, a person, and so on, then that can enlighten them and bring them to a place where they don't want anything to do. They want anything to do with these things, or, at least it really strengthens them, inspires them, and gives them the ammunition to fight these enticements that are in the world today. You have to have the way of looking at things properly. So, just to review again, what I'm saying is that our author, which is Rabbi Bakya ben Pakuda, and he wrote this book, I believe, in Arabic. And basically, he wants to explain how important it is to have an inner life, religious life, not just action, but also feelings and thoughts. Okay. And I'll read the sentences that say this again, because they're also very poignant. It is a book about inwardness and about one's conception of God. Okay, inwardness, feelings, and where we're at, and also your mind, conception. It is about reflection and gratitude, thinking and being grateful, trust and sincerity, discipline and love. So it's both sides, right? It is a book about the inner life of a person. Rabbi Bachya wrote this book in the last third of the 11th century, okay, a little while ago. We do not know much about him in the way of biographical details. We know that he lived in Spain and served as a dayan. We know that he lived in Spain, okay, and he served as a judge there. Yet after reading his book, in which he addresses the reader most warmly, one cannot help but count him as a close friend and mentor. He wrote it in such a way as to be useful for both the advanced students, such as himself, as well as the novice. As he writes in his introduction, I decided to write this book down. I decided to write these duties of the heart down in a book, so that I might expect of myself always to know them and bring myself to perform them. A book that would spur on the observant and stir up the indifferent, bolster the beginner and show the way to those who are perplexed. I wrote it to enlighten myself as well as to stimulate the simple and the negligent among the people of our faith. So there it is. And this is all included in the first mitzvah, the very first fundamental of the 7 laws, which is not to practice idolatry. And obviously the opposite of that is to have faith in God and have a connection with him and have gratitude towards him and to love him and fear of him, etc., all reflects or offshoots, and as we say in Hebrew, hidurim, which means like adornments of the mitzvah and beautifications and higher level of mitzvah on the prohibition against idolatry. Continues. Duties of the heart did become a favorite among simple people and luminaries alike. It became a favorite ethical work in Jewish history. Rabbi Yosef Karo, who was the author of the Jewish Code of Law, who lived in Safat, Israel. So Yosef Karo's Magid, his mentor angel, instructed him to read daily from the duties of the heart in order to, quote, to subdue the Yetzer Hara and overcome its power. So there you have it. Exactly. Interestingly enough, this is exactly what I said, that the studying of these ideas subdues the evil inclination and overcomes its power. That's how important this is. The only way to overcome the evil inclination when it tests us is through love and fear of God and a God awareness. I place God before me always, as King David says in the Psalms, right, David? That's the only way. The Holy Ari, Rabbi Isaac Luria, required of his disciples to study this book on a daily basis in order to awaken the hearts to God. Most awesome. So that's two examples. Rabbi Yonah Lansdorfer, author of the Miel Tzedakah, and author of another Torah work, wrote in his ethical will, person should immerse himself in the duties of the heart. From that book, one can acquire the inner essence of the select qualities necessary for serving God. One must delve into the book more deeply than one would delve into the study of the intricacies of different areas of Jewish law and other profound systems of thought. Rabbi Eliyahu, the Gaon of Vilna, famous Rabbi Eliyahu of Vilna, was fond of two works, one called Menorahs Hamar and Duties of the Heart. He goes on, there's so many here that talk about this. Two other rabbis, Rabbi Pinchas of Koretz, said he learned the duties of the heart 1,000 times and only then attained the level that he reached. Rabbi Elimelech of Lazenz advised, with fear and awe, one should engage each day in the study of the ethical works. We quote some Reishis Chacham, Shnei Lukas Abris, and duties of the heart. So, all right. Just going to skip a little bit to the end of the foreword. He says, if in reading this book by Rabbeinu Bachya, you become aware of the distance between where you are and the high spiritual levels he discusses, do not be discouraged. On the contrary, this new awareness is very positive and an authentic religious feeling, and it may be an important beginning for you. In other words, when we feel how much we lack in terms of our relationship with God, and when we feel how much we lack in terms of our service of Him, that's a very, very good thing. That's a religious experience. That contriteness is life-changing, hopefully. And if a voice within you should suggest that you are incapable now of attaining these levels, Rabbeinu Bachya's response is that there's still value in the reading and much you can do. As he states, but he cannot realize indeed he should master in knowledge, express longing for it in his speech, and yearn for it in his heart. Okay. Any questions so far? Any comments? We don't have really time for much. Let's just start the beginning, which starts on page 2, at least in this version, the introduction. So in this particular print, so there's a Hebrew. So interesting that so the Arabic was translated into Hebrew by Rabbi Judah ibn Tibbon, and then it was translated into English by Daniel Haberman. So here we go in the English. Introduction. Blessed be Hashem, the God of Israel, the only one who is truly one. Okay, so there we have already an idea. He's not just one, he's the only one, so to speak, who is truly one and only. He has the real oneness. So that's already saying a lot right there. Who created all that exists as evidence of his oneness. There's another one. That's another innovation. He's created everything as evidence of his unity, formed creations as testimony of his might, and brought things into being to bear witness to his wisdom and great goodness. Wow. That's amazing. So, but this is a point I've spoken about many times. This last point, he's brought things into being to bear witness to his wisdom and great goodness. I've said this in the past in a class a couple of weeks ago when we talked about the Sukkah, when we talked about the 70 bulls. And I said that all the nations, just through their self-expression, sanctify God's name. They all, or at least they all praise God, right? Because who gave them their abilities? And this is exactly what he's saying here. He says that God brought things into being to bear witness to his wisdom and great goodness. Right? So all the talents of all the different nations, who gave it to them? This also comes from God. And sometimes it's hard for us to see that, and even for the Jewish people, because there's this adversarial, even in Jewish law, there's, as you know, with like in terms of how to deal with an idolater or something. So there's these distance, and it could be hard to yet at the same time appreciate that the power or glamour, I don't know how shall I refer to it, but the whatever majesty or whatever different talents that exist in the nations, even if they're idolaters, that's also from God, right? And in the end of days, this will be done with that intent by the nations, and things will turn around. Anyway, I did get off track a little bit, but I think it's an interesting point. But back to here. So again, he's just blessing to God. He's praising him. He's starting with the praise, right? And he's saying that God is truly one. His existence is eternal. His goodness is perpetual. He created all that exists as evidences of his oneness. There's a lot, there's like this paragraph, I think you could probably study this paragraph. We could just meditate on this paragraph for a couple of days. And he formed creations as testimony of his might. So his goodness is perpetual, continues constantly. So how do we understand this phrase, who created all that exists as evidence of his oneness? I think what he means is that when you look at creation as a whole, and the fact that things work together in tandem, and the fact that things seem to, they interact with each other, and so on, that reflects a certain unity among different creatures and different things, which shows that this whole thing, this entire giant fishbowl of, when I say fishbowl, I mean the universe fishbowl, that whole thing there's one creator behind it, because it all fits together like a puzzle, right? So that's what he means by that. So it creates everything to give evidence of his oneness, and he formed creations as testimony of his might, and that he's talking about all the different creatures. When you watch that nature documentary and there's like the giant humpback whales, piercing the surface of the water, that's God's power there. That's what that is, right? So this last statement is the last statement he says in the paragraph, or at least before his quota, is more profound and needs more work and meditation on. It says, and brought things into being to bear witness to his wisdom and great goodness. So this is interesting, because this is almost incredible, really, what he's saying here. Very profound, what he's saying, very deep. What he's saying is, he said that he created everything to bear witness to his wisdom, and great goodness. But who are they bearing witness to? To mankind, right? To humankind. So in other words, what he's saying is the purpose of all this wonder, the purpose is all the depths of his wisdom, everything science discovers. In the end, what's its deeper purpose? It's a way to communicate, for God to announce himself, for God to reveal himself to man. And why is that so important? I guess the truth is, I mean, if you need to explain why it's important, then we have to go back to the first sentence. but in other words, what I'm saying is that when human beings, when we see how incredible creation is, and we find science, digs deeper into the depths of the great wisdom that is within the natural world that we can relate to, and when the wise men, and when Torah, I guess Torah is on a whole other level, but just within creation itself, the natural world, as human beings delve into that, they are experiencing a form of revelation of God. This is all part of God's wisdom there. This is part of, God saying, this is part of who I am. This is a glimmer. This is little sparks. This is of my deep wisdom. So it's not utilitarian alone, for sure. That's not the main purpose. The main purpose is to human beings to connect with God through it. And the very wise person who studied this book properly and gone through other preparations, may be able to look at the natural world around him, and also obviously the daily events of his life, and see how God speaks to him. But even more than that, you actually can see the eternal you can find the infinite within the finite. You can find it there. And there's a lot of things he's going to talk about that has to do with this. I mean, one of the, at least, is how nature just is continuous. Human beings, that we all have a life, or even particular animals of a species, but the species continues, and night and day continue. It's continuous, again and again, day after day, day after day, day after day. Where's all the strength of all that? Where's all this coming from? Why don't things just run out of gas and just stop and get tired, but they just keep going? Where is that coming from? It's just like human beings are used to, the scientists do everything backwards. They're like, okay, this is how it is, so let's find out why. Oh, this is because of this, and then oh, this is because of this, and then you ask them, yeah, but why is that true? Well, let's go dig a little deeper. That's because of that. But why is that? Well, I don't know, but it's just always like that. So therefore, that is, we know that is this and this and this. Okay, I'm glad that you figured out, how to use all that information, but you're not really answering the crux of the question, which is, every level you go, things get more complex, and you don't explain to me, like, how is this possible? Like, who's the programmer for this video game? I like to meet that guy. Is a genius. This is the most complicated video game I've ever played. Anyway, so you get my meaning, the metaphor. All right, so this is something that is so difficult to do, what he's saying, and yet he's saying this is the reason. Because most of us, as we're experiencing nature, it's very easy to get overwhelmed just by it in itself and get lost, which is what happened with the generation of Enosh, right? They started worshiping, they started appreciating the stars, and they got carried away. And the same thing I think happens with most people, is that or at least it's a human tendency to get full of passion by, the sun on your face and the wind and eating and just enjoy physical things, and then you just love them, and that's that. You forget about what lies behind all that. And that's why studying is important, and also keeping things in perspective is important. But another element of it that he doesn't mention is that before the sin of Adam, the world was a lot more refined, and you were able to sense from the creation, godliness and God's existence within creation. The time when the temple was standing was also more refined than it is today, where now God is completely, quote, hidden. What does that mean? Exactly what it means. Within the physical existence, within natural phenomenon, within history, it's very hard to see God. It's like it takes a lot of effort, and even then, you have to go on faith. You still there are doubts, and there's like he's hiding all the time. And but yeah, he's telling us here that, but this is the purpose, despite how hard it is to find God in nature. That's why God made nature. God made nature in order, of course, to help man, and of course that it should function, and for all the reasons, the more utilitarian reasons that it's there. But behind all that is a much more valuable and a much more precious element, and a lot more personal element to God. In other words, he didn't just make it because, well, we need it. It's kind of like, a person makes in his house, lahavdil, not to compare, but a person makes in his house a bathroom. And he makes it a beautiful bathroom. But if he didn't need a bathroom, he would make a bathroom. I mean, it's like if we didn't need to relieve ourselves, we wouldn't make one. So, in other words, I'm just trying to bring out here is that obviously God creating the world that man could take advantage of it is value, but there's a more intimate value, which is he wants to communicate with us. That's really a lot deeper, and a lot more valuable than just, here, I'm making this because, you need to eat, here's your food. You need air, here's your air. Here it is. Okay, I'm giving you everything you need. Here's your hotel keys. Let me know when you're done. Bye. No, it's not just that. It's more like a person painting a picture for his, most beloved friend or spouse, in which in the painting, he puts his feelings in there. He puts a piece of himself there. And that seems to be what I understand the author to be saying here, is that within what God created, he put himself there, in there as well. And that's really, and that also obviously would explain why the world nature is so beautiful and also so awesome and scary. You don't really think about it in those terms, but now it makes a lot more sense with what he's saying now. Because doesn't that reflect God? He's just so awesome and beautiful, but at the same time, awesome in the other sense of the word. Is very, there's a dread. Your life is in danger there. It's like looking over a cliff on the Grand Canyon. That is a view, but don't take another step. And similarly, when a person comes face to face with God, then there's terrible dread. But at the same time, there's an ecstasy. There's like an enlightenment like you wouldn't believe. I mean, that's prophecy. I mean, I can't, like Maimonides says about prophecy. Most prophets, they were shaking. They lost control of it. It was overwhelming. Anyway, I guess it's time to stop here. If you have any questions.